Bottle of water?
Yes, it is. And that's a new one,
Brand new.
right? There you go. All right. We'll go ahead and get started then.
Okay.
We could maybe start by just having you say your name and spell it for us.
Yeah, my name is Jack McElroy. It's Jackmc, capital Elroy.
Great. Thank you. And today's date is October 22nd, 2013. And we're conducting this interview on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. So let's start, if we could, by having you talk about when you came to work at Hanford initially, what brought you here.
Right, I was born at Grand Coulee Dam when my folks came out here from North Carolina, and grew up in Spokane. And they came out here to work on the dam. After it was completed, we moved to Spokane. I grew up there. I went to Lewis and Clark High School, and somehow or other I ended up taking every math and science class that they had. And in my senior year at Hanford, whoops, that's not such a good deal, is it? Sorry.
I forgot the warning.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Sorry.
That's all right. My bad for not reminding you.
I better, in fact, kill it. So what do we do now? Back up?
It's okay. They can edit.
Okay, sorry. So at Lewis and Clark High School, I took all their math and science classes, and in my senior year, Hanford started a engineering technician development program, and I was hired directly from high school by General Electric, and I came here in summer of 1955 and started working. I was at the large Central Stores administration building next to the bus lot for a couple months while they obtained our Q clearances, and the program also involved sending us to classes, so during that time we also started going to classes. So I basically came here in 1955 at the age of 18, directly out of high school.
How many students were there? How many?
There was about 20 of us that they recruited. There were several of us from Spokane. In fact, we formed a carpool and would go back to Spokane almost every weekend using the ferry that was here in North Richland. Went over to South Landing on the Pasco side, and that was the quickest way to get back and forth. So.
And so how long did you do that then? How long?
I did that for a year and a half, and I had some great rotations. At the same time that I signed on down here, I joined the Air National Guard up in Spokane, and I was interested in flying. So in 1957, I actually left here to go into a pilot training program, and but probably ought to back up to my experiences here.
Yeah. I would ask you about what sort. You said different rotation. What sort of?
Yeah, I ended up in my first assignment was radiation monitoring in the 325 building, where I was basically a technician supporting chemists and also other radiation monitors. I learned a lot about the radiation and monitoring and so on, which was limited to the radiochemistry labs there in the 325 building. My second assignment took me out to the 100 areas, where I worked for Larry McEwen in the heat transfer group, and I was assigned to his group in the hydraulics lab that was at the 100D and D area. And I brought in a picture and gave that to you of me working there in the lab. I met some really great chemical engineers there, including a guy that would have effect in my life later on by the name of John Batch, who was a PhD from Purdue. And they had quite an influence on my future, as it turned out. My next assignment, I went to radiation monitoring again with Herm Paz in the 100 areas, and he was stationed, they had an office at the 100D area also. And while I was on that assignment, I was very fortunate to be involved in the 105B outage, and during that outage we supported the changing out of the old curly Q pigtails. They were basically looked like a real pigtail, and that's how they got their name. They were formed just like a curly Q. And they were on the front face of the reactors, and in 1956 on the B reactor they changed those out and put in stainless steel flexible hoses and pipes. And so I was there at the reactor at that time supporting that operation.
How long did that take?
Oh, it was just a month or so to actually do that, and that was actually my last assignment, and I did pretty good and actually achieved radiation monitor status before I left and went to the Air Force in early 1957.
Of those different assignments, did you have one that you enjoyed the most? Or?
I think the radiation monitoring at 100 areas. I got to go out to all the different reactors. Was able to go to the rear face on occasion. I mean, the rear face is a really hot area, so you had to stay out to the side, but at least I was able to see the rear faces on the reactors and the front faces on several reactors, and so that was a very exciting assignment. But it was the hydraulics lab and heat transfer unit probably that had the biggest impact on me later on when I decided to go to college after I was in the Air Force.
And so what sort of work did you do in the hydraulics lab?
Basically took measurements of fluid flow, and then I did an awful lot of graphing for the engineers, and realized at that time that, geez, if I had a degree I could be having somebody else do the graphs for me. So it was very interesting.
Huh. And you said you and a group of you would drive Spokane often, back to Spokane on weekends. Where did you stay when you?
When we came here, they put us up in the Sanford Hotel, which was on Swift Boulevard. It's since been removed, but it was an old Army barracks type of place and had simple bunk beds and so on in it. But in 1955, the government started turning the city over to the community, basically, and things like prefabs became available for renting, and so a group of 4 of us actually applied for a prefab and ended up in a 1-bedroom prefab at 1213 Potter Street, and it was a little bit crowded, but we had a ball.
And what was the community of Richmond like at the time, 1955, 56?
Still had a mess hall. You could go to the mess hall there downtown, just across from where the post office is at now, and have a large buffet dinner and eat there. As I said, we stayed in a little hotel, barracks type hotel. Uptown Theater was there. It was a pretty normal, small community.
And so you were here for a year and a half or so.
You're right.
And then left. Can you talk about what you did and then what brought you back to Hanford?
Yeah, well, I left to go in the military, and I actually became a pilot and an officer, and came back to the Washington International Guard up at Geiger Field, and basically at that time decided, well, this is a great opportunity for me to go back to school. So I went to Gonzaga University while I was flying with the Guard and the Air Force, and I received a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, and GE hired me immediately to bring me back down here. So I was back down here in July of 1963. So I was gone for about 6 years.
Were you hoping to get back to Hanford at some point, or is that?
I didn't know. I really didn't know what life had in store for me, but it just kept changing and progressing, and I was certainly glad to get back down here once I had the opportunity.
So when you came back in 1963, then what sort of work were you doing? What areas were you working in Hanford?
I kind of stumbled, or fate or something steered me into waste management, and the group that was pioneering the development of waste treatment technology for handling radioactive waste. And they were based had a lot of their people in the 321 building, which was a building that had a lot of history. Other people may have mentioned it, but it had a lot of history for developing separations technology for the site, and at the time I was there, it was actually being used to develop waste treatment technology. And so I got in on with that group, and I spent 3 or 4 months with them learning about vitrification and also something called calcining, where you take liquid waste and heat it up and drive off a lot of the volatile materials and turn it into like a powder. And then from that we would melt it, vitrify it, make glasses. So that was my first assignment. Second assignment, I went out to 100N area and had a great assignment there as a process engineer. And I was actually out there at the site when President Kennedy came in I think it was 1963, prior to his assassination, of course, and saw him speak, and that was a great event. And N reactor was a great reactor. It's unfortunate that we had to shut it down the way we did.
Do you have any specific memories from the day that President Kennedy was here?
Not really, no. I definitely remember being out there and seeing him and hearing him talk, and the helicopters and pretty routine stuff. Yeah. I had one other rotation at PRTR, Plutonium Recycle Test Reactor, where I worked on the containment system for them. But in 1964, it was announced that they were going to shut down all the reactors, and so I decided it was time for me to pick a permanent assignment, and so I went back to the waste management group. I don't know if I mentioned their names, but Al Platt and Carl Cooley were heading up that organization, and they were real pioneers for developing waste treatment technology and working with other international people like in England and France at that time. So I got in with that group and had a lot of great opportunities with them.
You mentioned it's early '63, they already starting to work on vitrification sort of technologies.
Right.
And what other sorts of technologies in waste treatment were being researched or worked on?
At that time, it was primarily calcination and vitrification, and looking at 3 different products, either a calcine, powdery, dry product for final storage, or either phosphate glass or borosilicate glass. And also there was a phosphate ceramic at the time. So it really hadn't been decided what was going to be the choice for the U.S., what direction they were going to go with the treatment technology. And in the program I was in, starting in '65, we actually demonstrated with radioactive material in the 324 building several different technologies with all those different products. And from that, we chose to go with borosilicate glass, which is the current standard for product form for high-level radioactive waste.
And what led you to that solution?
The processes that we demonstrated, basically that seemed to be one of the best. We actually made it with in-can melting, a spray calciner and in-can melter. I brought in another photograph of that, showing all this equipment in the cell with the spray calciner setting over a melter and an in-can melter. And basically the product from that, the borosilicate glass, turned out to be the best product in terms of its durability. And also the process in-can melting was a pretty straightforward, simple process.
Can you explain that a little bit, just in little detail?
Yeah, basically we sprayed liquid waste into the spray calciner, which was heated to about 700 degrees centigrade. And as the droplets came down, they dried and turned into, they would be hot enough to where you get rid of all the nitrates and convert it to oxides. And the oxides would then fall down into the melter. And we had a couple different melters at the time. We were actually looking at a continuous melter that was made out of platinum and far too expensive, and the in-can melter, which was made out of Inconel. And we would add additives, boron and silica, to the calcine and then heat them up to over 1,000 degrees centigrade in either the melter or the in-can melter and convert them to glass.
So about what time period was this, this sort of the conclusion made to go with vitrification and that sort of thing?
In the late, the program was 65 to 71. And so it was around 1970 that we basically decided that the boral silicate glass was the preferred route. Then things changed, and they actually didn't support doing any waste work for about a year, and started it back up in 1972. And in 1972, I was recruited to be the manager for the development of the vitrification program. I was recruited by Al Platt, who I mentioned earlier, and John Batch, who was one of the PhD chemical engineers out at the 100D reactor at the time that I was there as a technician. So it kind of came back around again with one of the people that I worked for earlier. So they recruited me to head up the program to develop further develop technology for use in the United States for vitrifying high-level waste.
And so when were you able to actually begin the process of vitrification?
In 72, we started building the program, and with the focus on the spray calciner and in-can melter, which was the choice from that earlier program. And also decided it was time to look at something that would handle large quantities of waste, such as what they have here at Hanford, because when you just melt in a can, you're pretty well limited in terms of size and processing rate. So in 1972, I hired a engineer, actually Patel hired him. The Hanford Labs under General Electric became the Pacific Northwest Laboratories under Patel, and so in 1972 I was then working for Patel, and at that time we started developing and hiring engineers and so on. One of the engineers was Chris Chapman out of Kansas. He was a mechanical engineer, and we put him in charge of developing a new melter technology, the joule-heated ceramic melter. And I'll jump further ahead. The joule-heated ceramic melter now is the heart of the waste treatment plant. There's two of them in the low activity waste facility and two in the high level waste facility. But anyway, we started developing that technology in the early 70s, and by 1975 we had a prototype working in the 324 building of a liquid fed joule-heated ceramic melter. And I brought in a picture of that also to share with you.
So that's almost 40 years ago now that you really started developing some of that technology.
Right.
Yeah.
If you add that up, that's probably 41 years. So it's over 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, time flies. Anyway, that technology, I don't know, 1977, we were developing most of this technology actually for the commercial nuclear fuel cycle, with the expectation that the United States would develop reprocessing and have a complete fuel cycle here. And in 1977, President Carter put a moratorium on reprocessing, and that just threw everything into turmoil. And fortunately, there was a gentleman by the name of Frank Baranowski that was running the Department of Energy defense waste sites, and he chose to pick up the technology. And so we then turned all of our efforts from the commercial fuel cycle to supporting the defense waste facilities. So we spent several years working with DuPont to transfer the know-how for the spray calciner and in-can melter, as well as the joule-heated melter for use down at Savannah River. And they initially started out choosing the spray calciner and in-can melter, but after they figured that there was huge cost savings by eliminating the tall calciner in terms of canyon height for hot cells and processing cells. They decided to go with the Juliet melter. So we worked with DuPont and helped them get that technology in place in the Defense Waste Processing Facility at Savannah River. And it's been very successful. It's been running for about 20 years.
You came initially in 1955,
Right.
and the focus in Hanford was production. You came back in the 60s. It was just about to shift to definitely reduced production, right? And then,
Right.
I guess you look back at that, you've seen a lot of the sort of changes in mission, changes in technology.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, in thinking back to the years you worked at Hanford and the changes, how did that sort of, I mean, obviously impacted your work in terms of what you were focusing on, but changes in technology must have impacted your work as well.
Yeah, I still do a little consulting. It turned out to be a hot area, waste management.
Yeah.
So I'm still involved in it, you know, on a small part-time basis. I've retired 2 or 3 times, and I actually ran a small company for Battelle, outfit called GeoSafe, where we actually went out and we developed another technology called in situ vitrification, where we literally cleaned up sites by putting electrodes in the ground and melting the earth and the soil. And we brought that along and made it to where it was capable of actually using the same method to melt in a large container. And so for a while here, Hanford was looking at that technology. It was called bulk vitrification as a way of supplementing the current vit plant. And it's possible that technology might still have a use here at Hanford.
So you came back in '63, and then how long did you stay working at sort of
I worked for 30 years as an engineer, and retired in '95 from Battelle. But I retired to run the small company for Battelle, the GeoSafe company.
In looking back at the various things you've worked on, was there a part of your work, an aspect of the work that you found sort of most challenging, or part of it that you found most rewarding?
Probably the most challenging and rewarding was trying to make things work in a hot cell. The 324 building, which is still there and may be there for a while because there's contamination under this cell where we were doing the processing. You know, making things work, making them reliable, and getting week-long tests completed without major interruptions. That was very challenging and very rewarding, and it could be done. Sometimes the only way to solve the problem was to put it in a hot cell and make it work. I mean, you could spend a long time outside playing around, but you really didn't know what the issues and problems were until you put it in there and tried to do it.
And then also during your years at Hanford, were there any incidents that sort of stand out that, or problems or events that happened that sort of stand out in your mind above some of the others?
Not really. I mean, some little events, but probably wouldn't want to put them on tape. I would have to say that I am so amazed at the Manhattan Project and what they did so quickly and successfully. And even when I came here in '55 and then on in the '60s, we were able to do things pretty quickly. I mean, we could build it, put it in, test it. And somewhere '70s, '80s, things started to get too bogged down in paperwork and overly cautious. And the safety culture was always there, but somehow or other the safety culture got to where it really slowed things down. And it's unfortunate. Just takes too long now to get things done.
Are there any sort of specific examples of concerns about safety or sort of security, those sort of things that you can think of that?
Just the requirements for dotting the I's and crossing the T's and undergoing inspections and being afraid. I mean, I mentioned that sometimes the best way to get something done was put it in there and make it work. Now you can't put it in there until you're positive it's going to work. The VIT plant's a great example of that, and they have a truly big concern associated with these post-jet mixture tanks in the black cells, where they're going to be in there for 40 years. And I mean, that's a legitimate concern, but the fact is, I believe that 90% of the waste could be processed without that concern, and yet we're holding up the whole plant because of this other 10% of the waste, and that's frustrating.
Looking back on your time working at Hanford, how would you assess overall your experiences working at Hanford?
I had a great career, great experiences, a lot of memories, a lot of good memories, a lot of great people. And I raised my family here too. My wife, Carol, and daughter, Tony and Jill. They're bombers. It was Cole High, Columbia High at the time that they went to high school there, and I was Richland High School. And they had a great life and experience here also.
And at least maybe, I wonder if you could talk about sort of relationship between Hanford, the workplace, and then the community. How would you describe that relationship as, you know, you were living here in the 60s and 70s and beyond?
I don't know. Just business as usual. I don't set it apart from any of the other businesses around the area in terms of being different or unique. So just business as usual to me.
I wonder, is there anything I haven't asked you about yet, you know, related to your work experience at Hanford, or something that you'd like to share or talk about that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
I don't think so.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
There's probably something I'll think about later. But
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, of course, right.
Well, you know, I want to thank you for coming in today. This is a really interesting, you know, as someone who came, like you said, as just out of high school, really.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a fortuitous event to come directly out of high school to something like this, and to be a part of history, and have that. It basically impacted my life and my future decisions about where I was going to go and what I was going to do, very positively.
Right, and then you came back in a sort of very different capacity in many ways, but
right.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming in. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank you.
coming in and talking to us.